This BOF Live is brought to you in partnership with PayPal, the most trusted buy now, pay later brand, according to a recent survey, which gives merchants access to PayPal's 403 million users worldwide. Learn more at paypal.com/paylaterenterprise.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alice Gividen. I'm the content strategist here at the Business of Fashion. And welcome to today's BOF Live, where we'll be diving into the topic of non-linear commerce and the opportunities that this retail approach can bring. When it comes to commerce strategies, the industry trajectory has jumped years ahead of its pre-pandemic path. The rapid shift to e-commerce, I think McKinsey, for instance, reported 10 years of e-commerce adoption compressed into that first quarter of 2020. And that has driven the subsequent adoption of m-commerce, so shopping via mobile, and further still, the evolution of social media from pure engagement tools into dynamic social commerce platforms in their own right. And the result is really this kind of non-linear commerce experience for consumers. We're going to dive into exactly what this entails for brands and consumers shortly. But by way of introduction, non-linear really applies that payments can take place at any point in the customer journey now. So in these social media apps themselves, in live streams, in one-to-one video calls with store associates, really becoming a key experiential aspect of shopping in their own right. And further to that, the moment the transaction can happen has also been impacted. So payments can now happen weeks after the product has actually been received and enjoyed by the customer. In fact, Payments, a platform that analyzes payment trends, reported last month that buy now, pay later has seen its user base grow 85% globally in the last 15 months. So what's increasingly clear is that the path to purchase and therefore the subsequent payment channels are becoming less formulaic and actually more diverse than ever before. So to identify how non-linear commerce strategies are playing a role in transforming user experiences, driving conversion rates, I'm delighted to welcome two experts in this space. So Greg Lazewski is the VP of Global Pay Later Products at PayPal. PayPal has operated right at the forefront of the digital payments revolution for over 20 years, with a particularly expansive reach. It serves almost 400 million consumers and merchants in over 200 markets. Greg, it's a pleasure to have you on BOF Live.
Hi, Alice. It's great to be with you today. Thanks so much for having us and hosting. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Me too. And joining Greg is Holly Friend, who is the senior Foresight writer at the Future Laboratory, a leading futures consultancy which helps brands to make sense of the forces shaping the world around them. Holly is a writer, a trends forecaster, focusing on both consumer and brand behavior, but especially in retail, youth culture, and digital media. Holly, welcome to BOF Live. We're really delighted to have you join us today.
Alice, and hi Greg. I'm really excited to be here and join the discussion today.
Totally. So I think before we just get started, just a small bit of housekeeping for everyone attending today. We would love to involve as many of you as possible, and we'll do our best to make time for some questions at the end. So if you'd like to write us a question, click the Q&A button in your bottom toolbar just to send these straight through to us. Please use the Q&A, not the chat function for that. We have a much better chance of seeing it there. But I mean, by all means, use the chat function to drop in comments, let us know where you're tuning in from, share learnings, and connect with one another. And finally, if you have any need for any tech help at all, our customer support team is available via BOF events in the chat. So just to really briefly signpost what we'll be discussing over the next 40 minutes or so, this is really a conversation, I think, of two halves. We'll start by defining non-linear commerce, thinking about the range of strategies and considering the consumer behaviors that are changing retail. And then in the second part of today's talk, we'll really dig into how specifically non-linear commerce can kind of drive this business growth that we want to discuss. So I think just to begin by delving a little further into what non-linear means for commerce, Holly, I'd love to kick things off with you. Could you define non-linear commerce for the audience and tell us why it's such an exciting retail development?
Yeah, for sure. Excited to get started. So I'd say the best way to describe non-linear commerce for the viewers today, the listeners today, is probably in comparison to linear commerce and, the type of commerce that's really dominated retail for the last couple of decades, even 100 or so years. And these are the traditional channels that we used to use in order to consume goods and services. And, things like brick and mortar stores, our local high street back in our hometown, the malls we go to, all these places where we'd go, we'd pick up a product and we'd leave with that product, take it home. Obviously, at that point, in that process, there would be a transaction too, but it would be very linear, it would be very predictable, and we'd kind of know exactly what we're getting from that situation. But of course, this was disrupted. I mean, technology was really that kind of driving force that was going to change linear commerce for good. And first, as you said, came e-commerce, that movement to shopping online, the fact we could now, consume wherever, whenever, whatever we wanted. And it really opened so many doors for so many people. And then came m-commerce, and people were shopping through their mobiles, shopping through Instagram, shopping through YouTube, buying merchandise from their favorite YouTube creators. And then I feel like one of the most recent non-linear commerce innovations we've seen, and one that is really driving the future of non-linear commerce in a lot of ways, is live streaming. I mean, we're live streaming here today, so we're already making use of that technology. But it's so easy to embed commerce into the live stream experience. I'm sure many of you know that China has been a major driver of this. Live stream shopping in China is huge. And actually now this is being exported to the rest of the world too. So the West is slightly behind China in terms of the adoption of live stream commerce. Where in the West, I feel like we're always a little bit more suspicious of these new technologies that we aren't used to, where we have to shop in a new way. But eventually it'll be part of our daily routine, our daily shopping. And in fact, a recent study by Forrester found that 59% of Europeans claim to have bought through live streaming through an e-commerce platform, or would like to explore it. So more and more people are open to this new channel of non-linear commerce. And then there's also some really exciting paths too that I'm personally really fascinated by. So Klarna, of course, has popularized the buy now and pay later model, the fact that we can now pay for goods in installments, and pay for goods that maybe we want to return. It's really like acknowledging the fact that so many people in the e-commerce landscape are buying goods that they may not keep. They may just be trying for size, or they may be trying to test out a new brand, for example. And then also we have gamers who are buying virtual designer garments in the metaverse, through Roblox, Fortnite. Items that they may not be able to afford in real life, suddenly they have access to this incredible catalogue of goods through this space. And then also people are buying through DMs. This is something I find really fascinating, the fact that, me or you or anyone, maybe we have, in fact, can start our own shop on WhatsApp, on Instagram, in a completely informal way, and actually make money by doing things like selling bread. During the pandemic, everyone became bakers. So many people started their own micro businesses. And what's really exciting about this to me is that this means that anyone can now be a retailer, and basically anywhere can be a retail platform too. So we're shopping all the time, everywhere, and it's becoming more and more seamless the more we do it.
Thank you, Holly. I mean, that's a great introduction to this topic. Clearly, it spans so much. And I'm really glad you mentioned that idea of shopping everywhere all of the time. It's certainly something that we're going to come to, I think, later on in the discussion. But Greg, I'd love to know your opening thoughts. As I mentioned, PayPal has really sat at this helm of digital payments for 20 plus years, but obviously the events of the last 18 months have impacted consumer spending behavior and also attitudes, I think, dramatically. What are some of the biggest shifts that you've been tracking at PayPal? How are people paying for stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question, a great opening by Holly. These shifts to nonlinear, it really reflect the shift in the acceleration of digital capabilities by consumers. As Holly talked about, China is sort of leading the way in many of these things. That's the pandemic, I think, started to close the gap because people suddenly were home, they were locked down, and they had to use these digital capabilities. So you started to see the rise of more nonlinear type of behavior. I mean, there's just not much that we're doing that's not touching online or certainly mobile in one way or another. Even if you're in store and you're looking at your phone, you're sort of engaging in nonlinear commerce, whether you're doing price comparison. You might pick up a good and get to the queue, and it's too long. And you're like, you know what, I'm just going to have it shipped. I don't have time to wait today. And all of this is just really about taking advantage of and being adaptable to a shifting set of consumer behaviors. And in many ways, it's also the digitization of things that are just tried and true. It's meeting customers at the time and place that makes sense to them. Just to use an analogy, it's if you're in a grocery market, and you're in sort of the cheese section, they put crackers there because they go together, even though there's a separate cracker aisle. You're just seeing more and more of this happen, and that's why you see it in live streaming, right? You're in the middle of a game or you're enjoying content, and suddenly it's like, oh, I can purchase that good, or at least flag it to come back and purchase it later. And then you intersect that with payment flexibility, and it's matching up, this buy now, pay later rise. It's matching up not just someone's desire or need for a good, a service, or whatnot, with their cash flow and the ability to have flexible payments. And we see all of that stuff coming together in a way that it was probably hard to predict just a couple of years ago. And then obviously you have digital natives, Gen Z, millennials, who are just always at the forefront of sort of technical adoption, driving these patterns as well. And as they become a bigger and bigger shopping force, it's really important for all of us, the payment side, the retailers, content platforms, et cetera, to enable consumers to connect with goods and services and pay in ways that they want. I think the next 5 or 10 years are going to be really exciting to see these trends continue.
Certainly. I've never really thought about it before, as this idea of we talk all this time about drastic shifts and drastic changes, but actually, as you say, it's almost happened, and just build on natural customer sentiment and happened almost organically. I think that's really interesting. And actually, Greg, I'd love to stay with you and just really think about some of these trends from a commercial sense. So, if you're a business, what are the most important elements to understand about how consumers want to shop and pay for goods today?
Yeah, I think it comes back to fundamentals. And if it's an old adage, but I think it's true more than ever, which is the customer truly is at the center of the landscape. It is all about them. It's all about personalizing. They have their phone with them, so they can choose to step out of physical space and go virtual anywhere, or at any place in their journey across the day. At a lunch break, at a stop sign, if they're driving, and just being true to and accepting that the customer is at the center, and then trying to tailor experiences to them that allow them to sort of act at any point in their journey. So whether they're browsing, if they're out of store but engaging in content, social influencers, there's a big rise of taking advantage of social media platforms, and therefore the influencers on those platforms. I think it's just going back to fundamentals, keeping the customer at the center, leveraging technology to sort of serve the customer or meet the customer on their terms, in a way that's authentic to your brand as well. That's really key going forward.
I'm glad you mentioned customer centricity. It's something that I think we'll dig into in much more detail later on, but it really leads me nicely onto my next question. Holly, I know that at Future Laboratory you track emerging customer sentiment very closely. So I believe this question probably has 2 parts to it. What are the emerging sentiments that are really requiring brands and retailers to rethink that traditional linear path to purchase? And why are brands responding to it in the first place? What is it about this customer shift that is making them instill and innovate?
I mean, like Greg said, I think that it's the customer who comes first. It's the customer mindset that then brands innovate for. That's what drives this change. And it's brands reacting to what people are wanting. So it is something we explore a lot, and we really dig deep into at the Future Laboratory. And we've done this actually quite heavily over the last few years with a series of Foresight reports with Afterpay, which is a Australian fintech company. We really delved into what those new consumer mindsets are, who are driving them, and as I'm sure you can imagine, and most of our viewers can imagine, it is the youth generation, it's the youth culture who are driving these shifts and who are demanding more from brands and from payment providers. So of course, Generation Z is one of those generations who's calling for this change. And Gen Z are now the world's largest demographic. So brands really can't afford to ignore them. They have to listen to them. And something we talk a lot about at the Future Laboratory is bringing those young people into your business, not as unpaid interns, not as a kind of a community that you can dip into every now and again, but as a long-term strategy as part of your business. And Gen Z, just to give people an idea, if they're not that au fait with the different generation terms, they're around 13 to 26 at the moment. So they're really aging into that place in their life where they're becoming vital spenders that retailers across sectors will need to be aware of. So it's not just retailers that created children's wear or teenage wear or youth-focused products anymore. Gen Z are adults, and they're coming into a place where they're in their 30s and they have a lot of lucrative income to spend. And already flexibility is at the heart of their lifestyle. And I think this is something that Greg touched upon too, in terms of these more flexible payment terms. And the reason young people are requiring those and asking for those, and why brands are having to deliver it to them, is that they're poly workers, they're flexible workers. They are working so many different jobs. It's the new iteration of the / generation, which we saw when millennials were first kind of coming to power back in the 2010s. People got really excited about the fact that you could be a blogger and a DJ and an artist and also hold down a full-time job at the same time. But ultimately, of course, that led to burnout culture. And actually, young people, young Gen Zs, even though they're backlashing against this burnout culture and they don't want to be seen as these content making machines, 50 million of them actually describe themselves as online creators. That's a huge amount. And that figure was actually forecast last year in 2020. So we can just imagine how many more online creators there are now. And these online creators are making money in really interesting ways. So I'm sure we've all seen the rise to fame of these new creator platforms like OnlyFans even, and Patreon. And there are so many alternatives right now. There are so many competitors who are basically giving creators that ownership over their career and that agency and taking away the middleman, so they can actually make their own money on their own terms and work when they want to. And what that means is that they have a more flexible approach to work, of course, but also they're being paid in a completely different way. We're used to salaries. We're used to, a chunk dropping into our account once a month around the end of the month. And then you have, payday drinks, and people are buying their most expensive items around the end of the month. But this is going to change because young people are now being paid incrementally. They're getting small amounts all the time. They could be paid throughout the day. Maybe they're being paid through Monzo, while DMing their friends for a new cake that their friends made or a new jewelry piece that their friends made. So we need to consider how that will need to change payment terms, and they'll expect that.
Ooh. I think we may have lost Holly for a moment.
Oh, sorry. No. I was like, is everyone frozen?
The joy of BOF Live and of Zoom, it absolutely happens. Don't worry at all. But I really love this point that you're making about the idea of flexibility in Gen Z lifestyles, and that sort of translating into how they want to pay for things, and that flexibility there. And actually, Holly, I'd just love to be able to ground some of this in an example. I know you do plenty of research into this. So are there any brands that you'd like to spotlight who are doing the sort of non-linear thing really well?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many interesting innovators out there, and mostly being started by teenage or early 20s creators and disruptors. And it really just goes to show that it's going to be that generation. And they're now in a place where many have graduated from college and they can create their own business, and they can create it with a lot of wisdom and knowledge that they've learned throughout the world, but equally it can be for their generation. So there are so many great examples, but some I just wanted to spotlight are from a micro trend I recently wrote called Curator Kids, which if anyone's members of LSN Global, you'll be able to access on our Trends Intelligence sites. But it's a really interesting micro trend, in my opinion. It's one of my favorites that I've written recently. And it's basically it's basically about the creator economy is becoming relentless, incessant. Like I said, it's the bubble could be about to burst. You know, people are burnt out. They're spending hours creating one TikTok video. And actually, this is now giving rise to the curator economy. And actually, there's this whole new opportunity for people to create a career in a business out of curating content that already exists. So whether that's fashion products, even information, or where to buy the best lipstick, they're curating that information and selling it to other people. And a couple of examples to give, because I know it's great to have those case studies that people can go off and research later. And I think these case studies especially have amazing aesthetics too. One of them is Somewhere Good, which is a really interesting new online community created by the founder of Ethel's Club, which is a really interesting members club in New York. And it's basically a place for people to curate their own worlds and create their own digital playgrounds that other people can kind of delve into. And you can be part of these different communities based on your shared passions. And then MC is another example I just wanted to point out too. So that's spelled EMCEE rather than the letters MC. But it's essentially a business that's all about curators earning a passive income from their inspiration they can provide. So people who have great fashion sense, those bloggers, those Instagram followers we all follow who we're obsessed with what they're wearing, they can curate their own shop fronts based on their favorite products all over the internet. And then when followers buy that product using their link or through their shopfront, they actually get a commission from that. So they're becoming the retailers of the future, and all they're doing is curating. They're not actually creating any new products, which is really exciting.
Thank you so much. It's amazing, as I said, to kind of ground that in some examples. But we've spent quite a bit of time thinking really about the consumer sentiments, this customer first, customer to business mindset. And I'd now like to really come back to you, Greg, and ask what nonlinear commerce looks like operationally. How does it look like it? And where should brands and retailers be placing that moment of the transaction?
Yeah, Alice, one thing, just to build off of something Holly said, an additional thing that the Gen Z population is really used to is the idea of subscriptions. So one thing that's sort of fitting is we see a connection between the rise of buy now, pay later and the subscription lifestyle. I have $10 a fee for all my music. I have another $12 for my video. I'm renting my wardrobe in some cases. And it's this idea of just breaking up cost into these smaller chunks of money that ties back to also how earning is happening. So it's really fascinating to sort of connect all these dots from these different sort of elements of this new emerging economy. From an operational, to your question, if you go back to your traditional linear commerce, right? As Holly mentioned, you walk into a store, you pick something off the shelf, you walk to the checkout, you have a transaction, and you walk out and you have your good. That's just changing. It's all about putting, tracking the customer journey and then giving optionality to different points to complete a transaction, make a payment, et cetera. It's as simple as, what's happening, coffee houses led on this, right? You order your coffee on your walk, on your commute, you've already made the payment, you walk up and you pick up a cup of coffee and carry on with your day. That's an example of non-linear commerce. And I think you see that entering into additional modes or different verticals over time. And I think that's really important, is to let customers take advantage of convenience that often is powered through their mobile phone to just complete a transaction. And to do so in a way that also allows them to sort of have payment flexibility, which is where PayPal is really interested and excited to work with partners who are innovating from the creators and the curators to traditional, Main Street shops, et cetera, is just really elevating the ease at which merchants can take advantage of technology, which has never been easier, to make these great experiences for consumers that fit with the journey of a customer in any given moment or any given transaction.
That's interesting. I was actually kind of just thinking while you were speaking about the kind of businesses that can actually implement this. So if brands want to action this, can this be done but via an out-of-the-box strategy? Is the technology already there? Can it maybe require more investment via more customized solutions? What type or size of business can really access this idea of non-linear operationally?
Well, the great thing about the world we live in today, and even thinking back to Holly's example of curators, is that the technology is finally sort of caught up with the ideas. So, and the model of how people access, or people and/or companies access technology, is made all of these capabilities affordable to just about everyone, from a sole proprietor sort of making jewelry in their small garden apartment to a one store business to a regional or even national thread. There's all the same access to technology because of the rise of platforms. So whether it's Shopify or the BigCommerces or the Magentas of the world, with all their third-party ecosystem of folks creating these sort of micro apps to facilitate capabilities, and then you bring in payment providers like PayPal, everything's available sort of on an as-used basis. So whereas just 5 or 10 years ago, you'd have to have a big budget, you'd have to invest a lot of money up front, you'd have to sort of buy hardware, you'd have to hire technology, you have to either hire engineers or hire an expensive consulting firm, to build these solutions. You now basically have them all on a per use basis. You go to a platform, you have your own laptop, and you essentially can create anything that any of the largest retail brands can do. And that's really amazing. And I think will be a continued accelerant of innovation. Now that I haven't really said it this way before, but in many ways, innovation has been democratized. It's been decentralized. It's now in the hands of anyone with an internet connection, and maybe not even a laptop, just a phone or a tablet, can start to sort of create these nonlinear experiences that will meet customers, particularly the Gen Z and millennials, in a way that works for them, not in a way that works for the store or the brand, which is back to this idea that customers are sort of at the center of the universe more so than ever. The good news is businesses can keep pace from an affordability perspective, in a more affordable way than ever before.
That's amazing. I love this idea of kind of democratizing a whole new venture for retail, this idea of nonlinear commerce. And it feels apt when you consider that, as you've both been saying, these like young curators and small business owners are perhaps driving and instigating nonlinear as well. So I think this acts as a really nice segue into the second part of today's discussion, where we're really going to focus on how businesses are absolutely driving growth through nonlinear commerce. We've established that it exists and it's there, but it would be great to think about the opportunity for all kinds of businesses. I think, Holly, if we come back to you, everything we've been discussing indicates, payment channels, methods, strategies are more diverse, absolutely. And we've had plenty of examples already. You gave us an amazing introduction at the beginning of this call. But if we're thinking about business performance specifically, if you want to invest in a certain space, what are the most significant or the most high growth non-linear paths to purchase that you're tracking at Future Lab?
I mean, in terms of high growth, I think we just have to go back to the importance and the significance of live streaming. I mean, you can't ignore it. It's been around for a while. Obviously, it's not a completely new trend, but I think what's really interesting that's happening in live streaming is that it's morphing and it's kind of evolving over time and responding to all of these different consumer needs. And one of those consumer needs that I think live streaming responds really well to is the desire for peer-to-peer, and the desire for community and belonging, and all of these integral human needs that people have, that people, especially during the pandemic and maybe, you know, going forwards, if they're living in more remote areas, or they're working remotely still, they're not going into the office, they're not going to schools, for example. And that's the this idea of community commerce, which is another LSN macro trend that we've been tracking, which is essentially that we want to feel in a group of people. We want to buy from our peers. We might not necessarily want to buy from a big conglomerate. You know, we're seeing this huge backlash against brands like Amazon from young people. And it's really just a matter of time until that extends to a lot of these big corporations who are being called out for different reasons on TikTok and on the internet. And young people can't look away from it. You know, they're hyper aware of it. So one way that they're kind of getting around that you know, question of morality when it comes to shopping is by buying through these influ sellers. That's what we're kind of calling them, these influencer sellers who are basically real people. They're not hyper aspirational, idealistic, incredible looking women who've been kind of dominating our social media feeds for so long, but they're everyday people. It's part of this Gen Z love of what I call like the every teen movement, or, you know, normality culture, and just really wanting to be connected with people who are just like themselves. And it's a backlash against this idealistic nature of Instagram that's been growing and growing over the last few years. So one example I wanted to kind of draw out to just show you how that could work, how influ selling can become a business, because it is a commercial opportunity for retailers and brands too. It's not just something that exists in friendship groups. There's a new app that came out recently called Galaxy. And I think Galaxy is balancing this in a really interesting way. It's balancing that peer-to-peer with the concept of an entirely new retail platform. And it's basically, the whole concept of Galaxy is it's TikTok meets Depop, which, I mean, you're ticking so many boxes with that. Gen Z love TikTok, Gen Z love Depop. They're creating a merging of the two. So essentially it's a live stream app that allows people to sell their old clothes in a more entertaining way. So, you know, if we think about Depop, it's static images. You're just taking a photo of your shoes, maybe you're wearing them, maybe they're on your bedroom floor. But with Galaxy, you can kind of you can become a QVC salesperson. You can bring in the acting that you maybe haven't used since you were doing GCSE drama, and you can become a presenter for 30 seconds or however long it takes. And then people can buy those items instantly while watching the live stream. So, you know, rather than waiting around on Depop for your item to sell, people are instantly giving you money, and that money is dropping straight into your Galaxy account. And also just another one to point out that I think is doing something quite similar, and again from quite a big corporation, is Klarna. And Klarna is growing and growing, as we know. And it recently acquired Hero, which I think was a really interesting acquisition in the retail sector. So Hero, if you haven't heard of it, is a platform that basically turns store staff into influencers. So they kind of realized that, you know, who knows about our products better than anyone else? It's the people who already work for us. Maybe it's the people who worked in a store, but, you know, we've been shutting stores. We've realized stores are not as lucrative as they used to be. We're focusing more on e-commerce. So they're basically being repurposed as sellers, as digital experts, that they can answer questions, you know, give inspiration. And Klarna is applying this to its 250,000 retail partners. So it has potential to really disrupt the way we shop.
I think we'll definitely we're going to talk a little bit more, I think, about this sense of an experiential moment, like making the transaction part of its experience in their own right. Thank you so much for your examples. And we'll definitely get into that in a bit. But I would just like to pull the conversation back slightly and come back to you, Greg. And I really want to think about PayPal's global view of payments, and, you know, which markets or which categories should really view payment innovations. So everything we've been discussing, diversifying payment solutions, rethinking the natural progression to the transaction, you know, who should be viewing this as their next big growth lever specifically?
You know, in time, I don't think there is a market or a vertical that's going to be immune to these shifting consumer behaviors. history, I think, teaches us over and over again that those that don't adapt ultimately don't succeed. But with that being said, there are some clear trends and vertical examples that are sort of ahead of the curve, and probably if you're in that vertical, you want to make sure you're staying current to make sure you don't fall behind. Fashion would be a great example of that. The pandemic, when it locked us all down in its worst hours, and hopefully those are behind us, if not completely the worst of it. And online shopping is clearly something people want to do. It's this McKinsey compression of behavior, 10 years of behavior into 3 months. And some of the stats that or insights that we saw were, while all brands had a major rise in both transactions and transaction volume, fashion, as an example, outpaced on a transaction basis almost 3 to 1. We saw a nearly 65% rise in fashion purchases compared to about 30% or 20 some percent for non-fashion. And similarly, volume rose at about 60% versus 40%. Home goods is another category that we think it's important to sort of connect and take advantage of the latest trends. As travel, as we were talking earlier, as travel has started to open back up, which tend to be bigger purchases. So even the flexibility of installments in that situation is even more relevant. The idea of paying for a holiday in more manageable chunks, if you will, is really relevant. And then one thing that's been great about bringing more modern buy now pay later solutions to the market at PayPal is because we have tens of millions, 30 million plus merchants on our network, and 300 or 400 million consumers, we've been able to push a solution that's relatively ubiquitous in terms of where people can shop. And what we've seen from that perspective is on both sides has been really interesting. One is the shift into other verticals that have not necessarily been targeted by the newer players in the market. So we see spend across all sorts of retail oriented verticals, and the same on the demographic side. What started out for this flexibility in the Gen Z millennial base, is we have a large number of millennial and Gen Z customers, probably more than any other platform. But we also have tens and tens of millions of Gen Xers and older. We saw them start to take advantage of these new solutions as well. And that's one of the great things about having the chance to build these solutions at a company with a platform the size of PayPal. So, net, I think, all markets, all verticals, or at least most, will have to sort of make sure they're tracking the customer journey, looking for ways to sort of introduce optionality, whether it's on the payment side or just when I should complete a transaction, and meet the customer, as I probably said too often today, meet the customer where they want to be met, not just where traditionally you meet them in a checkout lane or on a checkout page.
Thanks, Greg. I don't think that we can say customer to business or customer centricity enough. I think that really is the crux of the conversation here. But I think that market opportunity, that view of how big this market opportunity is really key. So now I'd like to just sort of hone in on a specific aspect of nonlinear commerce. And Holly, I think, we've talked about it with live streaming, and you just touched on it, I think, with Hero, but digital clienteling platforms with these in-app video checkouts are picking up pace. We see brands trying custom solutions. We see white label platforms like GetBee, that help to fulfill this capability and embed a checkout process into that service. And all of this is, as we were saying earlier, is signaling that the moment that you pay for something is becoming experiential in its own right. So I'd love to kind of think about how can the moment of transaction, like the moment that someone buys something, become more experiential in the future?
It's a really good question, because even though we've seen so many examples of this retailtainment and people embedding media, gaming, excitement, discovery into the retail experience, I feel like the transaction moment has almost been left out of that conversation, because you have all of this fun finding the products on the site and like looking at the campaigns. And we've seen some great examples of these microsites that basically turn the retail experience into a gaming experience. But at the end of the day, once you buy a product, or when you get to that point of transaction, it's pretty static. You buy the product and you pay, and it's quite simple, and it's almost like the entertainment is forgotten about at that moment. But I think there's an opportunity to kind of flip this on its head, because I think a lot of retailers do that because they want to make the transaction moment seamless. They don't want to lose that customer at that point. They've worked so hard to get to that point. They don't want them to be like, actually, you know, I don't want a gamified transaction moment. I'm just going to leave the site. You don't want that to happen. But I think a lot of consumers, especially young consumers, are willing for friction to be added back into that process. And I think that could be really exciting when done well. And it can really bring discovery and surprise back into your brand image. So one example is Complex Land, which is basically a streetwear festival that was held online in the metaverse in, I think, December was the first one, and they've had a couple since then. But it basically turned all attendees into avatars temporarily, so they could explore the festival like they would explore the Excel Center. You know, they go in, they walk around, they meet people, they can like overhear conversations, they can buy, they can go to like a streetwear drop, they can watch some music. I think there was some artists performing there. And I wonder if there's a way that people can kind of stumble across fashion and not just fashion, but retail products in that environment in a way that's almost slightly more difficult, and like bringing a bit more of a treasure hunt idea or mindset to the shopping experience, because it's exciting. We like it. Maybe it's a case of, you know, you can switch that mode on or off. So the people who don't want that, they just want to get in, get out, they want to buy their thing, they don't want to be surprised or excited. Fair enough. There's always going to be people like that. But I think this could work really well for the hype market and for the streetwear market, because they know there's demand. They know their product is ultimately going to sell out. And many of them don't want bots to buy their products. They don't want, you know, someone to buy their product to be reselling it the next day for a profit. So this idea of like digital treasure hunts gives them a way to make sure that it's real humans in buying their products. You know, it's not just a bot logging on and buying it the minute it comes out with high internet speeds. And yeah, there are so many channels where this can be done. I mean, Slack is a good example too. Soul Savvy, which is a Canadian shoe brand, actually use Slack. So it's fans, or it's, you know, the people, the most loyal followers of its streetwear were part of this community, and then they got a special access basically to all of the exclusive drops, and added this element of kind of secrecy and surprise into that experience. And I think that's a really exciting way of bringing experience into the transaction process. So it's not just static, and it does excite you. And it's having that option, you know, people can turn it off, people can turn it on. I think that's what's really important.
Absolutely. I think to that point of being able to kind of opt in and opt out of that experiential aspect of the transaction is quite key. I think, as you prefaced all your insights with, I think obviously conversion is critical and is key to so many brands. And so it's interesting to consider how nonlinear can support in conversion, but also like offering flexibility and choice for how customers want to pay for stuff, I think is really key. Greg, I think given how critical this sense of conversion is to businesses, especially right now, I think there's a real sense of your competitor being one click away. It's something that you and I have talked about before. But what insights can you share about customers' expectations around the transaction today, particularly if businesses really want to bolster conversion and retention as well?
Yeah, I think of 3 or 4 key things here. One is just how important price and affordability is, and that's why we think no interest installment programs like Pay in 4, Pay in 3 that PayPal offers, others offer in the market are just so important. It's breaking up those purchases into smaller, more manageable payments for consumers. is really critical, and the data backs it up. Some of the research we've done, 64% of consumers say that they would actually consider leaving a merchant if they didn't have a buy now pay later solution available. When it comes to the actual product, 33% of consumers say, no late fees, as an example, are really important. So they don't want to fall into any tricks or schemes in terms of the product ends up costing more because because of something sort of out of their control, or they accidentally missed a payment or whatnot. And then in our own data, we just see the adoption of these solutions, not just the trial or the first time use, but the ongoing repeat use is really strong. Within 3 months of someone using a buy now pay later solution from PayPal, more than half are making a second, third, fourth transaction. And by the time it's 6 months has gone by, it's over 70%. So this is a value prop that resonates with customers, not just sort of episodically, but as an ongoing way to consume goods and purchases. So, after price and affordability, trust is really important. So, all consumers want to engage with brands they trust, not only that they love or have fun with, but also that they trust. And that's really important when you get to the transaction or payment side of things. And we particularly PayPal spent a lot of time building trust over decades now, and we're super proud to show up as the number 2 most trusted brand on a recent Morning Consult survey. And then it comes down, I think, to convenience. And convenience, I think, in this sense, takes 2 modes. One is ubiquity. So it's having partners or solutions that work across channels, across brands, so that you're not sort of figuring out, well, gee, when I buy something from one merchant or curator, do I pay one way? And if I go to another, do I pay a different way? But having ubiquitous sort of reach, and then mobile centricity is just making it easy for people to leverage their phone. Even if they're in an offline world, it's just the lines are blurred. We've talked about blurring now for a decade, but I think it's as true now as it's ever been, and that will continue to be part of the future for sure.
Greg, I'd love to actually stick with you as we kind of stay on this topic of non-linear as a growth strategy. When we were prepping for this call, you flagged to me that actually the fashion industry was really leading the charge when it came to buy now, pay later. But obviously, as we've learned on this call today, non-linear payments span a whole host of things. Are there any adjacent industries that fashion can learn from in terms of non-linear payments and non-linear commerce? Are there any industries that we should be taking note of? Who's like leading by example?
Yeah, one adjacent industry for sure is beauty. Beauty has also been sort of, really quick to adapt as folks were sort of locked down during the pandemic. These beauty brands still needed to connect with their customers. Suddenly everyone was on camera all of the time. So while they weren't in person, it sort of created a new sense of concern. Like people wanted to look their best, the rise of the waist up wardrobe, as it's been referred to. So we've seen beauty brands really adapt and bring both sort of nonlinear experiences, using social channels and influencers to drive trial of product, offering flexibility of payment options. I think is a good industry to watch. Another sort of adjacent brand, I touched on it earlier, is as travel is opening back up. It's not just the travel providers, the hotels or the airlines, et cetera, but also those industries that support it. So luggage is a good example. So we've had a great partnership with Samsonite as an example, who's offering payment flexibility and having really good success in terms of people adding to their luggage and ordering new pieces and whatnot. And I think we'll continue to see it sort of spread beyond. I'm just thinking, the other one that we saw, sorry, Alice, it just came to mind, was as people got locked out of gyms, was home equipment, gym equipment. We saw a real rise of people buying things that they historically wanted to touch and feel before they purchased, and now suddenly they were going to reviews, or they were going to find out from curators like what's the best weight set or gym set or or bike to have at home, and then building these mini home gyms so they could stay active during the pandemic. So lots of good vertical examples of folks sort of taking advantage of modern tools capabilities.
It's exciting to think that this really is something that is spanning commerce at large, and touching all these different categories and different verticals. Amazingly, we're actually at the final question from me. Thank you both so much. And it's actually one I'd love to hear from both of you on, because I think we've talked about this sense of customer centricity so much throughout the conversation. But perhaps if we briefly come to Holly first. Non-linear commerce strategies implies that brands and retailers know where to place the moment of transaction across different channels, because they understand the customer journey. They understand that it's connected, that it works across different touch points, that they are buying online, picking up in store, paying for it later, returning it online, all sorts of things, and how connected that experience is. So both of you, as I said, will come to Holly first, but if you were to give advice really to the BOF community, to everyone watching, what do you believe are the most important principles in creating this sort of connected customer journey?
That's a really interesting question. And I think like you said, it's that it's all connected. It's a network of experiences. When we buy things now, like I said, we're buying them anywhere, anytime, any place. And like, I'm sure we've all had that experience of the apps on our phone just suddenly, hitting our quota. Like, our phone can't take any more apps. We can't download any more things. It's overwhelming to have so many platforms to go to buy our products. So to me, I feel like the use of data is going to be really essential to the non-linear commerce experience. Because if people are buying through all these different places, it's individual platforms are learning what we want. They're understanding our needs, our desires, our style, the type of skin we have, whether it's combination, etc. But like, we need that data to be shared across all of these different platforms in order for it to be a seamless shopping experience. So I think thinking about how we utilize data, obviously with data, we have to be very careful. We have to make sure that data is consensual, that they're opting in to that experience of having this seamless shopping process across different categories and across different websites. But I wonder if, there's even more ways to bring all of these channels together to make it even more seamless. And I wonder if one way of doing that is to capitalize on something that we've been seeing at the Future Laboratory, which is this concept of symbiosis strategies, which was in our recent macro trend, Elastic Brands. And this is basically all about the fact that brands should now be working together. They shouldn't be seeing each other as rivals. They should be, if they're working for the same mission, whether it's sustainability, whether it's an enhanced shopping experience, whatever it might be, they should put their resources together and work together for the greater good. And we've already seen, for example, Caring and LVMH partner in the name of sustainability and realize that they need to put their differences aside and work together to create real change. But, could these two companies or other conglomerates in the future collaborate to create some sort of master e-commerce app or resale platform or some non-linear retail experience, which means that you're shopping with these different brands simultaneously, but maybe not through the usual kind of department store or amalgamated approach, but through something that the brands have control over and are launching themselves rather than kind of outsourcing it to department stores. So I think that's something really interesting in non-linear commerce. And equally as well, we're going to have to think about cryptocurrency. And it's something that I've been mapping a lot recently. I'm really fascinated personally by Web3 and all of the opportunities in Web3. And I was reading a stat the other day that found that 43% of UK students already own cryptocurrency. So if you think about the fact that they're students now, in a few years, they're going to be going into careers, they're going to be lucrative consumers that all brands need to be aware of. And if they have so much of their money and their assets and wealth invested in crypto, what does that mean for your payment system? How do you embed that in the payment experience. So that's something that a lot of retailers are going to have to be thinking about when we think about Gen Z wealth and what that means and where it sits, because ultimately it's going to be a decentralized wealth experience. It's not going to be a cash society. It may not even be a debit card society. It's going to be something completely new.
That newness is certainly exciting. Greg, do you have any kind of closing comments on this connected customer journey and really mapping out? I know PayPal has a very specific and expansive view on how people are shopping. Yeah, anything further to add to this sort of new way of approaching non-linear commerce?
Yeah, I'll just simply add, I think the question sort of had the answer in it, and Holly sort of hit it right at the top, which is, to know where your customer is in the journey is to first know your customer, and which is going to come down to data. And I think it really is, taking advantage of data, and I like, Holly's theme on, how do companies and businesses cooperate so that we can pull data in a way that's permissible, not creepy, if you will, which happens sometimes, right? You feel like you're talking in your kitchen and suddenly you see an ad about a product and you see the ad an hour later on Instagram. But the more data can be shared in a responsible way, the more that these solutions and experiences can be tailored to the customer. So I think cracking that really will open up the next wave of innovation. And then just to build on the crypto thoughts, I think it's another great point Holly made. We're really keen about the future there as well, as we try to bring out crypto for everybody, not crypto just for big investors on our platform. And then even starting to roll out the ability to pay with crypto, which is still very nascent in its days, right? It's is it a currency? Is it an investment? But letting everyone or folks familiar with it, touch it, but you can buy $5 of crypto or $10 of crypto. It doesn't have to be about, massive, large investments. It'll be really interesting to do this call in 10 years and see how crypto in general has permeated into the retail space.
Amazing. I think those themes of a decentralized network, of co-opetition, of authentic data, and ultimately really having this customer to business mindset are really lovely kind of themes to end on. I'd like to thank you both so much, Greg and Holly, for bringing so much expertise and insight into this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the BOF community feels the same. So thank you. I'd like to also say a big thank you to the BOF events team for facilitating everything. And thank you all for attending and taking part, joining in the chats. I'm sorry we didn't get time to come to some questions, but I hope you found it really insightful. And just as a note, if you missed any part of today's session, it will be available to watch on YouTube after we close. So thank you so much again, and we look forward to welcoming you back to BOF Live very soon. Bye for now, Greg and Holly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Alice.